I was standing in my backyard, drinking my morning coffee, when I noticed the construction crew setting up equipment on the far corner of my property in Scottsdale, Arizona. At first, I thought maybe the city was doing some work on the utility lines, but then I saw the HOA president, Brenda Martinez, directing them with a clipboard in hand like she owned the place. My name is Derek Donovan, and I had bought this 3-acre property 2 years ago specifically because it gave me space away from neighbors and their nonsense. The house sat on the front acre, and the back 2 acres stretched into what used to be scrubland that I had been slowly landscaping. I paid good money for every square foot of this land, and now someone was about to build something on it without asking me. I set my coffee down and walked across my yard, my boots crunching on the gravel path I had laid down last summer. The construction workers were unloading lumber and concrete bags, and I could see survey stakes driven into the ground marking out what looked like a pretty substantial structure. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "What exactly is going on here?" Brenda turned to me with that practiced HOA smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was in her late 40s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club meeting, even at 8 in the morning. "Oh, Derek, good morning. We're just getting started on the new community concession stand. Isn't it exciting, community concession stand?" I repeated, looking at the stakes in the ground. "On my property." She waved her hand dismissively. "Well, according to the HOA bylaws, any land within the community boundaries can be utilized for community improvement projects. This corner of your lot is perfect because it's near the walking trail." I felt my jaw clench. "Brenda, this is my private property. You can't just build something here without my permission. Actually, if you check Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA agreement you signed when you moved in, you'll see that we can." She pulled out a folder from her bag and showed me a highlighted section of text. I took the papers and read through them carefully. The language was vague and confusing, talking about community enhancement zones and collaborative neighborhood improvements, but nothing explicitly stated they could build on my private land without consent. "This doesn't say what you think it says, Brenda." "Well, the HOA board voted on it unanimously last month. The vote was legitimate and we're moving forward. This concession stand will serve the entire neighborhood. We'll have refreshments, snacks, maybe even rent out sports equipment. It will really bring everyone together and increase property values. I don't care if you're building the Taj Mahal. This is my land, and I'm telling you right now to stop." I turned to the construction foreman. "You need to pack up and leave." The foreman, a weathered man in his 50s, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I've got a signed contract with the HOA and a building permit from them. I'm just doing my job." "The permit is fraudulent if it's for construction on land they don't own," I said firmly. Brenda stepped between us. "Derek, you're being unreasonable. This is for the good of the community. Everyone will benefit from this, including you. Think of it as your contribution to neighborhood harmony." "My contribution?" I almost laughed. "I contribute by paying the outrageous HOA fees every month. I don't remember volunteering my land for your pet project." "This attitude is exactly why the board sometimes has to make executive decisions," Brenda said, her voice taking on that condescending tone that made my blood pressure rise. "Not everyone understands what's best for the community." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling my lawyer right now. If that construction crew isn't gone in an hour, I'm calling the sheriff's department too." Brenda's expression hardened. "You do that. But I should warn you that fighting the HOA on this will result in fines for non-compliance and legal fees that will far exceed anything you'd spend just letting us proceed. We have a very robust legal fund." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a reality," she replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to ensure this project stays on schedule. We're planning a grand opening in 3 weeks." I walked back to my house, already dialing my attorney, Marcus Webb. He had helped me with the property purchase and had warned me about HOA overreach, but I never imagined they would try something this blatant. Marcus answered on the third ring. "Derek, what's going on?" I explained the situation while watching through my kitchen window as the construction crew continued setting up despite my objections. Marcus listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Okay, this is pretty egregious, even for an HOA," Marcus said. "The clause they're citing doesn't give them the right to build on your private property without permission. That's a complete misinterpretation. However, here's the problem. Stopping them right now will require an emergency injunction, which means going before a judge today or tomorrow. That's expensive and not guaranteed." "How expensive?" I asked. "Retainer of $5,000, plus court costs, plus my hourly rate. You're looking at potentially $10,000 to $15,000 to fight this immediately, and that's just to stop construction. To actually resolve the issue and potentially sue for damages, you're looking at much more." I rubbed my temples. I had the money, but it was the principle of the thing. Why should I have to spend thousands defending my own property rights against an organization I was already paying fees to? "What are my other options?" "You could let them build it and then sue for trespassing, unlawful construction, and damages after the fact. You'd have a strong case, but it would take months to resolve, and in the meantime, there's a structure on your land." An idea started forming in my mind as I watched the workers begin digging post holes. "Marcus, if they build this thing on my property without my permission, who owns the structure?" "Well, legally, anything built on your land becomes your property unless there's a specific agreement stating otherwise." "Why?" "Just thinking through scenarios," I said, my mind racing. "Let me ask you this. If they complete construction, stock this concession stand with inventory and equipment, and I then take possession of everything as compensation for their unauthorized use of my land, where would I stand legally?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's an interesting approach. Technically, you'd be within your rights to claim the structure and its contents since it's on your property without a legal agreement. They'd have to sue you to get it back, and they'd have a weak case since they're the ones who trespassed in the first place. It's a bit of self-help, which courts don't always love, but given the circumstances, you'd have a strong argument. So I could legally keep everything they build and everything they put in it? Most likely, yes. Though you'd want to document everything thoroughly, send them formal notices about the trespass, and make it clear you're claiming the property as compensation. It would be important to do this correctly to avoid any claims that you stole their property." A smile spread across my face. "Marcus, I think I have a plan. Let's talk about how to document this properly." Over the next hour, Marcus and I worked out the details. I would send formal written notice to the HOA stating that any construction on my property was without permission, and that I would claim ownership of any structures and contents as compensation for the trespass. I would document everything with photos and videos, timestamp everything, and make sure I had a clear paper trail showing I had objected from day one. "This is either brilliant or going to backfire spectacularly," Marcus said with a chuckle. "But I have to admit, there's a poetic justice to it. Just make sure you don't do anything that could be construed as theft. Let them finish and stock it completely, then claim it formally." "Got it," I said, already feeling better about the situation. I spent the rest of that day taking detailed photos and videos of the construction. making sure to get timestamps and GPS coordinates embedded in the files. I also walked the property line with my survey documents to confirm that the construction was definitely happening at least 30 feet inside my property boundary. There was no ambiguity here. That evening, I drafted the formal notice to the HOA with Marcus's help and sent it via certified mail, email, and even had it hand-delivered by a process server to make absolutely certain they received it. The letter was clear. I did not authorize construction. I objected to their use of my property, and I claimed any structures built and items placed on my property as compensation for their trespass. Brenda called me within an hour of receiving the hand-delivered notice. "Derek, this letter is ridiculous. You can't just claim our concession stand." "Watch me," I replied calmly. "You're building on my land without permission. That makes the structure mine. Pretty simple. We have invested community funds into this project." "You're talking about stealing thousands of dollars worth of materials and labor. I'm talking about compensation for trespassing. You should have thought about that before you started building on land you don't own. The HOA will sue you into oblivion," she threatened. "Let me know how that works out for you, Brenda. My lawyer is pretty confident about our position." I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, I found a notice on my door threatening me with fines for interference with community projects and harassment of HOA board members. The fine was $500, with an additional $100 per day until I complied with their demands to allow construction to continue unimpeded. I photographed the notice, sent it to Marcus, and filed it away. These fines were meaningless since they were based on a completely invalid premise. In fact, they were actually helping my case by documenting the HOA's overreach. Construction continued for the next 2 weeks. I watched with interest as the concession stand took shape. It was actually a pretty nice structure, better than I expected. They built a solid wooden frame with a concrete foundation, installed a serving window with a roll-down security shutter, and even ran electrical lines to it from somewhere, though not from my house. The exterior was painted in cheerful colors with the HOA logo prominently displayed. Every day, I documented the progress. Every day, I received new fine notices from the HOA, which I dutifully photographed and filed. The amounts were getting ridiculous now, over $5,000 in accumulated fines for various made-up violations. Brenda tried to talk to me several more times, alternating between threats and attempts at reasoning. "Derek, just let this go. You're making yourself a pariah in the neighborhood over nothing." "It's not nothing. It's my property rights," I responded each time. During the 3rd week, I watched as they began stocking the concession stand. They installed a commercial refrigerator, a freezer, shelving units, a cash register system, and began filling it with inventory. Boxes of candy, chips, drinks, ice cream, hot dogs, condiments, napkins, cups, and all manner of concession supplies were carried in. They even installed a popcorn machine and a small grill for hot dogs and hamburgers. I made detailed videos of everything being brought in, making sure to capture the HOA members directing the operation. Brenda was there almost every day, checking items off lists and organizing the space. They even hired a local high school kid, Tommy, to work as the attendant. "This is going to be so great for the neighborhood," Brenda told Tommy as I recorded from my back porch with my phone. "We'll be open every afternoon and all day on weekends. The walking trail gets so much traffic, and people will love having a place to grab a cold drink or a snack." The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday. The HOA had sent out flyers, posted on social media, and even put up signs around the neighborhood. "Community Concession Stand Grand Opening." free hot dogs and drinks for the first 50 visitors, supporting your neighborhood, bringing us together. Friday evening, I called Marcus. They're having the grand opening tomorrow. Everything is stocked and ready to go. What's my move? First thing tomorrow morning, before the grand opening, you need to take physical possession of the property. Change any locks they've installed, post no trespassing signs, and make it clear the structure is now yours. I'll be on standby for the legal fallout. You think they'll call the police? I asked. Absolutely. And that's fine. The police will see it's a civil matter. You'll show them your property documents, and they'll tell the HOA to sue you if they want their stuff back. Just don't be aggressive or physical with anyone. You're simply taking possession of your own property. That night, I barely slept. I kept going over the plan, making sure I had all my documents in order, all my photos and videos backed up in multiple places, and my notices to the HOA organized chronologically. Everything had to be perfect. At 6 in the morning, while the neighborhood was still quiet, I walked out to the concession stand with my toolbox and a stack of no trespassing and private property signs. The stand had a padlock on it, but it was attached to my property, so I had every right to remove it. I used bolt cutters to remove the lock, then replaced it with my own heavy-duty padlock. I posted signs on all sides of the structure making it clear this was private property and no one was authorized to enter. Then I went inside and took inventory. The amount of stuff they had stocked was impressive. The refrigerator was full of sodas, energy drinks, and bottled water. The freezer had ice cream bars, popsicles, and frozen burgers and hot dogs. The shelves were stocked with chips, candy, popcorn kernels, condiments, paper products, and even a cash box with $200 in startup change. I estimated the total value of the structure, equipment, and inventory at somewhere around $20,000, maybe more. I documented everything with photos and videos, then locked up with my new lock and went back to my house to wait. The grand opening was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I made coffee and breakfast, then settled on my back porch with a clear view of the concession stand. At 9:30, Brenda's car pulled up along with several other HOA board members. I could see them approaching the stand, talking animatedly. Then Brenda noticed the new lock and the signs. Even from a distance, I could see her face turn red. She pulled out her phone, and I assumed she was calling me, but I let it go to voicemail. Instead, she marched toward my house with 2 other board members in tow, a balding man named Robert Chen and a younger woman named Patricia Walsh. I met them at my back gate before they could enter my yard. "What do you think you're doing?" Brenda demanded, waving her phone at me. "The grand opening is in 30 minutes and you've locked us out of the concession stand." "My concession stand," I corrected calmly. "Built on my property without my permission. I've claimed it as compensation for your trespass, as I clearly stated in my certified letters to the HOA, which I know you received." "You can't do that. That's theft," Patricia shrieked. "It's not theft to take possession of property on my own land. You built this structure without authorization. Under property law, anything permanently affixed to my land becomes my property. You should have thought about that before you trespassed." Robert stepped forward, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Listen, buddy, you're going to unlock that stand right now, or we're calling the police." "Go ahead," I said, pulling out my phone. "Want me to dial for you? I'd love to have an official police report documenting your trespass and attempted theft of my property." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? You let us build it just so you could steal it." I objected from day one. I sent multiple notices. I documented my objections. You chose to ignore all of that and proceed anyway. These are just the consequences of your actions. I crossed my arms. Now, if you'll excuse me, you're on my property without permission. Please leave." "This isn't over," Brenda hissed. "The HOA will sue you for everything you've got. Looking forward to it. My attorney is ready whenever you are." They stormed off, and I watched as they huddled near their cars, making phone calls and gesturing angrily. True to Robert's word, a sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later. I was actually relieved. Having an official police report would only strengthen my documentation. The deputy, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a calm demeanor, approached my house. "Sir, I'm Deputy Franklin. I received a call about a dispute over some kind of structure on this property." "Yes, officer. Come on back, I'll show you." I led him to the concession stand, where Brenda and her group were waiting. Brenda immediately started talking. "Deputy, this man has locked us out of the community concession stand and is refusing to let us access it. We have a grand opening scheduled in 15 minutes, and he's stolen thousands of dollars worth of HOA property." Deputy Franklin held up a hand to silence her, then turned to me. "Sir, what's your side of this?" I pulled out my folder of documents. "This is my property, as shown in this deed and survey. 3 weeks ago, the HOA began construction on this corner of my land without my permission. I objected immediately, both verbally and in writing. Here are copies of the certified letters I sent to the HOA, clearly stating that I did not authorize construction, and that I claimed the structure as compensation for trespass. Despite my objections, they completed the construction and stocked the building. This morning, I took possession of my property." The deputy looked through my documents carefully, then walked the property line, checking the survey markers against the physical boundary. He spent a good 10 minutes reviewing everything while Brenda fumed nearby. Finally, he came back and addressed both parties. "Okay, here's what I'm seeing. This is clearly private property belonging to Mr. Donovan, as shown by his deed and survey. The structure was built without his permission, despite his written objections. This is a civil property dispute, not a criminal matter. Madam, if you believe you have a right to this structure or its contents, you'll need to take that up in civil court. I can't force Mr. Donovan to give you access to property on his own land." "But he's stolen thousands of dollars worth of goods," Patricia protested. "That's your allegation, but from what I can see, he took possession of items that were placed on his property without permission. Again, if you believe you're entitled to these items, civil court is your remedy." Deputy Franklin turned to me. "Sir, I'd recommend you not remove or sell any of the contents until this is resolved legally, just to keep everything clean." "Understood, Deputy. I'm not planning to sell anything. I'm just claiming it as compensation for the trespass and unauthorized use of my land." "Fair enough. I'll file a report documenting what I found here today." He looked at Brenda. "Madam, I'd suggest you and your board members leave this property now before he decides to press charges for trespassing." Brenda looked like she wanted to explode, but she held it together. "Fine. But Derek, you haven't heard the last of this. The HOA has a very aggressive legal team, and we will get our property back, plus damages for your interference." After they left, Deputy Franklin handed me a card. "If they come back and harass you, give me a call. You've got good documentation here. Whatever happens in court, you did this the right way." "Thank you, Deputy. I appreciate your time." The rest of that day was surprisingly quiet. I could see people showing up for the grand opening, being turned away by HOA members who were stationed near the walking trail. I felt a little bad for the neighbors who had nothing to do with this dispute and just wanted a cold drink, but this wasn't about them. This was about the HOA's overreach and my property rights. On Monday morning, I received a formal demand letter from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Morrison and Associates. The letter demanded I immediately return all property belonging to the HOA, cease interfering with the operation of the concession stand, and pay damages totaling $35,000 for losses related to the canceled grand opening and reputational harm to the HOA. I forwarded the letter to Marcus, who called me back an hour later, laughing. "They're asking for damages. That's rich. Send them a counteroffer. You'll grant them an easement to operate the concession stand on your property for $1 per year, with all revenues going to you as back rent for the 3 weeks they've been trespassing. Oh, and they are responsible for all property taxes on the structure and maintenance." "You think they'll go for that?" I asked. "Not a chance, but it establishes that you're willing to negotiate and that you're not just being spiteful. Document everything and make sure you're always taking the reasonable position. The judge will appreciate that." I had Marcus draft a formal response to the HOA's attorney, outlining my position and making the offer he suggested. I also included a detailed accounting of all the times I had objected to the construction, all the notices I had sent, and photos showing the structure was clearly on my property. The response from Morrison and Associates came back fast. They rejected my offer and stated they would be filing a lawsuit for return of property, trespassing of chattels, and damages. They gave me 7 days to comply with their original demand or face legal action. "Let them file," Marcus said when I called him. "We have an incredibly strong case. They trespassed, you objected, you claimed the property following proper notice procedures. No judge is going to side with them on this." The lawsuit was filed exactly 7 days later. The HOA was suing me for $60,000 now, claiming the value of the structure, inventory, equipment, lost revenue from the concession stand, damage to the HOA's reputation, and legal fees. The complaint was full of inflammatory language, painting me as a vindictive neighbor who had sabotaged a community improvement project out of spite. Marcus filed our response 2 weeks later. We denied all their claims and filed a counterclaim for trespassing, illegal construction, harassment, and the fraudulent fines they had been issuing. We asked for $50,000 in damages, plus attorney's fees and a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from entering my property for any reason without my express written permission. "Now we wait," Marcus told me. "These things take months to get to court, but I feel good about our position." The waiting was frustrating. In the meantime, the concession stand sat on my property, locked and unused. I checked on it regularly to make sure the refrigerator was still running and nothing was spoiling. I didn't want them claiming I had destroyed their property through neglect. The HOA, meanwhile, ramped up their harassment. I received daily fine notices for increasingly absurd violations. My grass was too long, even though I had just mowed. My house needed repainting, even though I had painted it a year ago. I was parking my truck in my driveway at an improper angle. The fines totaled over $20,000 within a month. Every single notice went into my file and was documented for our lawsuit. Each one just strengthened our harassment claim. Marcus was actually pleased they were being so aggressive. "They're digging their own grave here. Keep collecting these notices. The judge is going to love this." About 3 months into the legal battle, something interesting happened. I started getting visits from other neighbors who had their own HOA horror stories. A guy named Paul from 2 streets over told me about being fined $1,000 because his basketball hoop was visible from the street. A woman named Jennifer described being threatened with a lien on her house because she planted flowers the HOA deemed non-conforming to neighborhood aesthetics. "We're all hoping you win this case," Paul told me over coffee on my back porch. The HOA has been out of control for years, but nobody wanted to spend the money to fight them. You're doing what we all wish we could do. I'm not trying to be a hero, I said honestly. I'm just defending my property. Yeah, but if you win, it sets a precedent. It shows they can't just do whatever they want without consequences. The depositions phase of the lawsuit was particularly satisfying. Marcus got to question Brenda under oath, and she did not handle it well. He asked her to show where in the HOA bylaws it specifically authorized building on private property without owner consent. She couldn't. He asked if she had personally verified the property lines before authorizing construction. She admitted she hadn't. He asked if she had received my objection letters. She admitted she had, but claimed they were legally insufficient. He asked if she had consulted with a real estate attorney before proceeding with construction. She admitted she hadn't. By the end of her deposition, it was clear the HOA had acted without any legal basis and had simply assumed they could bully me into compliance. Marcus was practically grinning when we left the deposition office. That went even better than I hoped, he said. She basically admitted to every element we need to prove trespass and bad faith. Their attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. My deposition was more straightforward. I explained my objections, showed my documentation, and made it clear I had acted to protect my property rights after the HOA refused to listen to reason. Morrison's attorney tried to make me look vindictive, but Marcus had prepared me well. I stayed calm and stuck to the facts. The case was scheduled for trial about 10 months after the initial incident. During that time, the concession stand remained locked and unused on my property, a constant reminder of the HOA's overreach. The HOA had actually tried to cut my lock off twice, but I had installed cameras specifically to monitor the stand, and I caught them both times. Those incidents became additional evidence in our case. The trial lasted 3 days. The HOA presented their case first, arguing that the bylaws gave them broad authority to improve the community, that I had been obstructionist and difficult, and that my seizure of their property was theft, plain and simple. They brought in several board members to testify about how much work had gone into the project and how my actions had damaged community morale. On cross-examination, Marcus methodically tore apart their case. He got each board member to admit they never verified the property lines. He got them to admit they received my objection letters and chose to ignore them. He got them to admit they had no specific bylaw provision authorizing construction on private property without consent. When it was our turn, Marcus presented our documentation chronologically, showing a clear pattern. I objected immediately. I objected in writing multiple times. I warned them I would claim the property, and I did exactly what I said I would do. He showed the property survey, proving the construction was well inside my property lines with no ambiguity. He showed the ridiculous fine notices, documenting the HOA's retaliatory harassment. I testified about finding the construction crew on my land, about my immediate objections, and about the HOA's refusal to listen. I made it clear I had been left with limited options when they refused to stop their trespass. The HOA built this structure on my land without permission, I told the judge. I gave them every opportunity to stop, and they ignored me. I claimed the property as compensation for their trespass, following proper legal procedures. I didn't steal anything. I took possession of property that was built on my land without authorization. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Herrera, listened carefully to everything and asked pointed questions of both sides. She seemed particularly interested in the bylaws and whether they really authorized what the HOA claimed. Miss Martinez, Judge Herrera addressed Brenda directly at one point. You're an intelligent person. You received multiple letters from Mr. Donovan clearly objecting to this construction and warning you of the consequences. Why did you proceed anyway? Brenda straightened in her chair. Your Honor, we believed the bylaws gave us the authority, and we believed Mr. Donovan was being unreasonable. The concession stand was for the benefit of the entire community, including him. But did you verify you had the legal right to build on his property? The judge pressed. We consulted our interpretation of the bylaws, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. Did you consult with a real estate attorney or verify the property lines before beginning construction? Brenda hesitated. No, Your Honor, we did not. Judge Herrera made a note and moved on, but I could tell that exchange hadn't gone well for the HOA. On the third day, after closing arguments, Judge Herrera took a short recess before delivering her ruling from the bench. When she returned, her expression was serious. I've reviewed all the evidence, testimony, and legal arguments presented by both sides. This case hinges on a fairly simple question. Did the HOA have the authority to build a structure on Mr. Donovan's private property without his consent? After careful review of the HOA bylaws submitted into evidence, I find that they did not. The language cited by the HOA is vague and relates to community planning generally, not specific authorization to use private property without owner permission. I felt my heart racing as she continued. The evidence shows that Mr. Donovan objected immediately and repeatedly to the construction. He sent formal written notice to the HOA warning them of his intent to claim the structure as compensation for their trespass. Despite these clear objections, the HOA proceeded with construction and stocking of the concession stand. Mr. Donovan then took possession of the property built on his land, following the procedures he had outlined in his notices. Judge Herrera looked directly at Brenda. The HOA's actions in this case were high-handed and legally unsupportable. You cannot simply decide to use someone's private property for a community project without their permission, regardless of how beneficial you believe that project might be. Property rights are fundamental, and Mr. Donovan was entitled to object to this unauthorized use of his land. She turned to me. Mr. Donovan's response, while somewhat unorthodox, was legally supportable given the circumstances. He did not steal the HOA's property. Rather, he took possession of property that had been constructed on his land without authorization, after providing proper notice of his intent to do so. The judge shuffled some papers before continuing. I am ruling in favor of Mr. Donovan on all claims. The concession stand, all equipment within it, and all inventory are hereby declared the legal property of Mr. Donovan as compensation for the HOA's trespass. The HOA's claim for damages is denied in its entirety. I tried not to show too much emotion, but inside I was celebrating. Marcus squeezed my shoulder briefly. Furthermore, on Mr. Donovan's counterclaim, I find the HOA liable for trespass and harassment. The fine notices submitted into evidence are clearly retaliatory and not based on any legitimate violations. I am awarding Mr. Donovan $25,000 in damages, plus attorney's fees to be calculated and submitted within 30 days. I am also issuing a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from entering Mr. Donovan's property without his express written permission, and voiding all fines issued to him related to this dispute. Judge Herrera looked at both parties. I hope this serves as a lesson about respecting property rights and following proper legal procedures before taking action that affects private property. This case should never have reached this court. A simple consultation with a real estate attorney before beginning construction would have prevented all of this. Miss Martinez, I strongly suggest the HOA board consult with legal counsel before undertaking any future community projects. With that, she gavelled the session closed. The Morrison attorney looked shell-shocked. Brenda's face was pale. The other HOA board members who had attended looked at each other in disbelief. Marcus and I stood up, and he shook my hand. Congratulations. That was about as complete a victory as we could have hoped for. Thank you for everything, I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I couldn't have done this without you. You did the important part by documenting everything and handling yourself properly. That made my job easy. We left the courtroom while the HOA group was still huddled with their attorney. I didn't gloat or say anything to them. The victory was enough. Over the next month, Marcus calculated his fees and submitted them to the court. The total came to $42,000. Judge Herrera ordered the HOA to pay it all, plus the $25,000 in damages. The HOA had to pay me $67,000 total. Getting the money took some additional legal maneuvering because the HOA board tried to delay payment, claiming they needed to hold a special assessment of all homeowners to raise the funds. Marcus filed a motion to compel payment, and Judge Herrera was not amused by their stalling tactics. She gave them 14 days to pay or face contempt charges. The check arrived on day 13. $67,000, plus the concession stand and everything in it. It was worth about $25,000, bringing my total haul to around $92,000 in compensation for the HOA's trespass. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Remember, I mentioned neighbors had been coming to me with their own HOA horror stories. Well, after the judgment became public record, I started getting even more visits. It turned out that Brenda and the board had been systematically abusing their authority for years, issuing illegitimate fines, misappropriating HOA funds, and making decisions without proper votes or homeowner input. A guy named Michael Diaz, who worked as an accountant, asked if he could review the HOA's financial records. As a homeowner, he had a right to see them. What he found was shocking. The HOA had been collecting about $200,000 annually in fees from the neighborhood's 87 homes. But their legitimate expenses, things like landscaping the common areas, maintaining the walking trail, and administrative costs, only totaled about $100,000. So where was the other $100,000 going each year? Michael dug deeper and discovered that Brenda had been paying herself a $60,000 annual administrative salary that had never been approved by the homeowners. The other board members were getting $15,000 each as board service fees. They had also been taking expensive trips to HOA conferences in places like Hawaii and Las Vegas, all paid for with community funds. Michael came to me because he knew I had just beaten them in court and had a lawyer familiar with HOA issues. Derek, they've been stealing from us for years. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in misappropriated funds. But nobody wants to stick their neck out and lead the charge against them after what they put you through. I called Marcus and explained what Michael had found. Is this criminal? Can we report them to the police? If they've been misappropriating funds without homeowner approval, that's definitely fraud, possibly embezzlement, Marcus said. You'd need to gather all the evidence and take it to the district attorney's office. But yes, this could be criminal. I talked to Michael and several other neighbors, including Paul and Jennifer. We decided to form a group to challenge the HOA board. We called ourselves the Homeowners' Rights Coalition, which was maybe a bit dramatic, but it fit the situation. Michael compiled all the financial irregularities he could find. Jennifer documented all the illegitimate fines that had been issued to various homeowners over the years. Paul researched the bylaws and found numerous instances where the board had violated proper procedures. I contributed my documentation from my own case and my experience with their operations. We compiled everything into a detailed report and submitted it to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office. I wasn't sure if they'd take it seriously, but about 2 weeks later, I got a call from an assistant district attorney named Lisa Chen. "Mr. Donovan, I've reviewed the complaint you and your neighbors submitted regarding the HOA board. This is quite thorough documentation. I'd like to meet with you and the others who contributed to this report." We met with Ada Chen the following week. She spent 3 hours going through everything we had found, asking detailed questions about dates, amounts, and procedures. At the end of the meeting, she leaned back in her chair and nodded. "Okay, here's what I'm seeing. You have documented evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of fiduciary duty. The board members were legally required to act in the best interests of the homeowners and to follow the bylaws in managing community funds. Instead, they paid themselves unauthorized salaries, took luxury trips, and issued fraudulent fines to generate revenue. This is criminal activity." "What happens now?" Jennifer asked. "I'm going to open an official investigation. I'll need to subpoena the HOA's complete financial records, interview board members, and build a formal case. This will take time, probably several months. But based on what you've shown me, I believe we have grounds for criminal charges." That was satisfying to hear, but it was also just the beginning of another long process. The DA's investigation took about 4 months. During that time, the HOA board realized they were in serious trouble and tried to quietly resign. But it was too late. The investigation was underway, and resignation wouldn't protect them from criminal liability. In month 5 after our meeting with Ada Chen, the news broke. Brenda Martinez, Robert Chen, and Patricia Walsh were arrested and charged with fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of fiduciary duty. The local news covered the story extensively, especially because it tied back to my concession stand case, which had already gotten some media attention. A reporter from the local NBC affiliate came to interview me. "Mr. Donovan, you're the homeowner who won the concession stand case against this same HOA board. Now they're facing criminal charges for financial crimes. Do you feel vindicated?" "I feel sad that it came to this," I said honestly. "I just wanted to protect my property rights. But when we started looking deeper, we found they'd been taking advantage of the entire neighborhood for years. I'm glad they're being held accountable, but I wish they'd just respected property rights and followed the law in the first place." None of this had to happen. The criminal case moved faster than I expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence, all 3 board members took plea deals rather than go to trial. Brenda pled guilty to felony fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 2 years in state prison, with credit for time served, and ordered to pay back $180,000 to the HOA. Robert and Patricia each pled to lesser charges and got probation plus restitution. The sentencing hearing was interesting. I attended along with Michael, Paul, Jennifer, and about 20 other homeowners. Brenda stood before the judge, looking nothing like the confident HOA president who had directed construction on my property almost 2 years earlier. She was gaunt, tired, and defeated. Her attorney made an emotional plea for leniency. "Your Honor, Miss Martinez made serious errors in judgment, but she truly believed she was serving the community. She never intended to harm anyone. The judge, a stern man named Judge Raymond Torres, wasn't buying it. Miss Martinez, you held a position of trust. Homeowners paid their HOA fees believing that money would be used for legitimate community purposes. Instead, you paid yourself an unauthorized salary, took luxury trips, and systematically violated your fiduciary duties. When challenged, rather than address your wrongdoing, you engaged in harassment and retaliation. The harm you caused goes beyond money. You betrayed your entire community's trust. Brenda wiped tears from her face but didn't speak. Judge Torres continued. The court accepts your guilty plea and sentences you to 2 years in state prison, with eligibility for early release after serving 60% of the sentence. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $180,000 to the Homeowners Association. This restitution takes priority over all other financial obligations until it is paid in full. After the hearing, several of us stood outside the courthouse. I never thought it would go this far, Paul said. When you first locked that concession stand, I thought you were crazy. Now look what it led to. All I did was stand up for my property rights, I said. The rest was just following the evidence where it led. Still, man, you started this. You showed us we didn't have to just accept their abuse. Michael clapped me on the shoulder. The neighborhood owes you. With the old board in disgrace, the HOA needed new leadership. There was a special election, and homeowners actually showed up this time. The turnout was unprecedented, about 70% of all homeowners. A new board was elected, made up of people who actually wanted to serve the community rather than enrich themselves. The new board president, a retired school teacher named Donna Sanders, reached out to me a few weeks after taking office. Derek, I know you've had an absolutely terrible experience with the previous board. On behalf of the new leadership, I want to apologize for everything that happened. We're committed to running this HOA the right way, following the bylaws, respecting property rights, and serving the community. I appreciate that, Donna. I hope you mean it. We do. I also wanted to ask you about something. That concession stand on your property. I know it's legally yours now, but would you consider leasing it to the HOA? We'd pay you fair market rent. You'd maintain ownership, and the community could actually use it the way it was originally intended. No pressure at all, just thought I'd ask. I thought about it. The concession stand had been sitting locked on my property for over a year now. I had considered various uses for it, maybe converting it into a workshop or storage shed, but I hadn't gotten around to doing anything with it. Let me talk to my lawyer and think about it, I told her. If we can work out a fair agreement, I'm open to the idea. Marcus and I drafted a proposed lease agreement. The terms were clear. I maintained ownership of the structure and all equipment. The HOA would pay me $800 per month for an easement to operate the concession stand. They were responsible for all operating costs, inventory, staffing, utilities, and maintenance. The lease was year to year and could be terminated by either party with 90 days' notice. All revenue from the concession stand would go to the HOA to help offset dues for homeowners. The new board accepted the terms without negotiation. This is more than fair, Derek, Donna said. Thank you for being willing to work with us. The concession stand finally opened about 18 months after construction had first begun. The new board did a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony and invited the whole neighborhood. I attended, standing in the back and watching as kids lined up for ice cream and cold drinks. Tommy, the high school kid who had originally been hired to run the stand, was actually still working there. He was now a college freshman but came back during summer break to help out. "Mr. Donovan," he said when he saw me, "I just wanted to say thanks. I know the whole situation was crazy, but this job helped me save for college. I'm glad it all worked out." "Me too, Tommy. Me too." The neighborhood changed after everything that happened. People were more engaged, actually attending HOA meetings and paying attention to what the board was doing. The new leadership was transparent about finances, published detailed budgets, and asked for homeowner input on major decisions. It was what an HOA should be. As for me, I got my property rights protected, recovered significant damages, and helped expose corruption that was harming my entire community. The $800 a month I collected from leasing the concession stand was just a bonus, less than I could have gotten but fair for everyone involved. Paul hosted a barbecue at his house about 6 months after the concession stand opened, inviting everyone who had been involved in challenging the old board. We stood around his backyard, eating burgers and talking about how different the neighborhood felt now. "You know what the craziest part of this whole thing is?" Michael said, holding a beer. "If Brenda had just asked permission to build on your land, you probably would have said yes." I laughed because it was true. "Yeah, if they'd approached me respectfully, explained the plan, offered a fair lease agreement, I would have considered it. Instead, they just assumed they could do whatever they wanted." "That was always their problem," Jennifer added. "They thought being on the board made them little dictators instead of community servants. We raised our drinks to that. The whole experience had been frustrating, expensive, and time-consuming, but it had also been necessary. Property rights matter. Accountability matters. And sometimes, you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult and everyone tells you to just go along to get along." As the sun set that evening, I looked around at my neighbors, people I'd gotten to know much better through this whole ordeal. We'd formed genuine friendships based on mutual respect and shared values. That was worth more than any judgment or settlement. The concession stand still sits on the corner of my property, now serving its intended purpose of providing refreshments to people using the walking trail. Kids laugh as they buy popsicles on hot summer days. Neighbors stop for cold drinks during evening walks. It's become a gathering spot, bringing people together just like Brenda had originally envisioned. The difference is now it's being operated legally, ethically, and with respect for everyone's rights. I collect my rent each month. The HOA uses the revenue to benefit the community, and homeowners enjoy the amenity without it being built on a foundation of trespass and deception. Sometimes I walk out there in the evening and lean against the side of the building, looking at the neighborhood and thinking about everything that happened. The whole situation could have been avoided with basic respect and communication. But since it wasn't, I'm glad I stood my ground. I'm glad I documented everything. I'm glad I fought back instead of being bullied into compliance. The case set a precedent in our county for HOA overreach. Marcus told me other attorneys have cited my case when defending homeowners against aggressive HOAs. That feels good, knowing that my fight might make things easier for others dealing with similar situations. As for Brenda, I heard she was released from prison after serving about 14 months. I don't know where she went or what she's doing now. Part of me feels bad for her. She made terrible decisions and paid a heavy price. But she also had numerous opportunities to do the right thing and chose not to. Sometimes consequences are harsh, but they're necessary for justice. The property line markers I installed during the original dispute are still there, clearly showing where my land begins. I repainted them last spring, making them bright and visible. It's a reminder to everyone, including myself, about the importance of boundaries, both literal and figurative. My relationship with the HOA is now cordial and professional. I pay my dues on time, they leave me alone and respect my property, and we cooperate when it makes sense for everyone. It's how it should have been from the beginning. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned several important lessons. First, document everything. Those photographs, videos, and written notices saved me in court. Second, know your rights and be willing to defend them, even when it's hard. Third, corruption often hides in plain sight, and exposing it requires courage and persistence. Fourth, communities are stronger when leadership is accountable and transparent. And finally, sometimes what seems like a simple property dispute can uncover much bigger problems that need to be addressed. The concession stand, which was supposed to be a simple neighborhood amenity, became the catalyst for holding corrupt leaders accountable and reforming an entire HOA. It's funny how things work out sometimes. What started as an outrageous violation of my property rights ended up benefiting everyone in the neighborhood. I still make my morning coffee and stand on my back porch, looking out over my property. The view is the same as it was before all this started, except now there's a cheerful blue and white concession stand on the corner. But it's my concession stand on my property, being used with my permission and for everyone's benefit. That makes all the difference. The neighborhood kids don't know any of this history. To them, the concession stand has always been there, a place to get a cold drink or a snack during summer vacation. They don't know about the legal battles, the criminal charges, or the hundreds of hours spent fighting for justice. They just know it as a friendly place where Tommy or whoever is working that day will give them a popsicle and ask about their day. And honestly, that's how it should be. The next generation shouldn't have to deal with the corruption and conflicts we dealt with. They should inherit a community that functions properly, with leaders who serve rather than exploit, and with systems that protect everyone's rights. My lawyer Marcus and I still keep in touch. We meet for lunch every few months, and he always asks if the HOA is behaving itself. So far, so good. The new board is careful to follow all procedures, consult with legal counsel before major decisions, and treat homeowners with respect. They learned from their predecessors' mistakes. The restitution payments from Brenda and the other former board members trickle in slowly. The HOA has recovered about 40% of what was stolen, and that money has been used to reduce dues and improve common areas. Every homeowner got a detailed accounting of where the money went and how it's being used now. Transparency is the new normal. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just let them build the concession stand without fighting back. They would have gotten away with it, emboldened to continue their pattern of abuse. Other homeowners would have continued being exploited. The corruption would have continued unchecked. Sometimes I think about that alternate timeline and I'm glad I chose to fight, even though it was stressful and expensive at the time. The $800 I get each month from the concession stand lease goes into a savings account I've designated for property improvements. I've used it to upgrade my landscaping, repair my fence, and install solar panels. It's satisfying to know that money, which came from the HOA's attempt to violate my rights, is now being used to improve my property on my own terms. Donna, the new HOA president, has turned out to be exactly what the neighborhood needed. She's organized, fair, and genuinely committed to serving the community. Under her leadership, the HOA has become what it's supposed to be, an organization that maintains common areas and handles shared concerns, nothing more and nothing less. No power trips, no overreach, no corruption. Last month, we had the 2-year anniversary of the concession stand's actual opening under the new management. Donna organized a small celebration, nothing fancy, just acknowledging that the neighborhood had been through a lot and come out better on the other side. I was asked to say a few words, which felt strange but also right. 2 years ago, I woke up to find construction happening on my property without permission, I said to the gathered neighbors. I could have never imagined it would lead to everything that followed, but I'm glad it did. We rooted out corruption, held people accountable, and built a better community. This concession stand represents all of that. It's a reminder that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's difficult. Thanks to all of you who supported that fight and who continue to make this neighborhood a great place to live. People clapped, and several neighbors came up afterward to thank me personally. It was humbling and gratifying at the same time. I never set out to be any kind of hero or reformer. I just wanted to protect my property. But sometimes doing the right thing in one area leads to positive changes in others. As I write this, sitting on my back porch with my coffee, watching the sun come up over my property, I feel at peace with how everything turned out. The concession stand is there, legally and properly. The HOA is functioning correctly. The neighborhood is thriving. Justice was served. And I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is simply stand your ground and refuse to be pushed around, no matter how powerful your opponent seems. That's my story about how the HOA built a concession stand on my land, and I kept everything as rent payment. It's a story about property rights, accountability, and what happens when you refuse to accept injustice. I hope it never happens to anyone else, but if it does, I hope they fight back just as hard as I did. Because in the end, standing up for what's right is always worth it, no matter the cost.